Welcome to the Musician Circle podcast with your host, Aidan Brookstone, only at Studio Raphael. All right, I'm recording. Cool. Chris, man, thank you so much for joining me on the Musician Circle. Grateful to have you here. Let's start off with a little bit about yourself and your path with music these days.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely.
My name's Chris Haindel. I'm 40 years old. My path in music started when I was a teenager. I think I was probably 15 years old. Yeah, it's about 15, 16 years old. When I stumbled across a demo on a random CD-ROM for some sort of a music production app, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it basically was some sort of a software program that was triggering loops. And so I started putting together mixtapes and playing them for my friends when we drive around at lunch during high school. At that time, I was hanging out with a lot of, just punk rockers, and so trying to learn how to play electric guitar and drums and that kind of stuff, and mostly just hanging out with a lot of other teenage musicians and just kind of trying to absorb through osmosis what they were doing.
Right.
I've never really had an academic background or anything in music. Never really took any lessons or anything like that. And so a lot of it for me in high school, I'll be honest, was just trying to be one of the cool kids, just trying to do something to make myself feel special and stand out from the crowd a little bit in the small town that I grew up in. I live in Oregon, and I've lived in Central Oregon most of my life. I was going to high school in a place called Redmond, which is just outside of Bend, if you've heard of Bend before.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a resort community, but Redmond is not so much. Redmond's kind of a suburb of Bend, and at the time in the 90s, it wasn't really a fun place to live at all, especially if you were a teenager with any kind of alternative interests. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves to find things to be subversive about. And one of those things was music.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one thing I think that kind of attracted me to it, was just finding another way to stick it to the man, and being a little subversive was making really loud, annoying music.
Mm-hmm.
And there was punk rock. So
nice.
So a lot of my friends introduced me to a lot of that DIY ethic. And especially, I think it's especially important in a small town where you don't have a whole lot of resources, and you do have to do so much of it yourself. And It does feel a little bit cringy at times when you're a teenager and you're trying to sew patches onto your jackets, and you're getting made fun of by the other kids in school because they either think you're a poser or you're just a dork, one or the other, And so there was a little bit of that too, just kind of pushing back against the culture of Central Oregon at the time, which is still very white bread, even 30 years later. So, and believe it or not, the punk rock scene in Bend at the time was pretty vibrant. It was very much DIY, and there were kids that were not much older than I was that were putting on relatively big punk shows and bringing in big names. I remember seeing CKY. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all. Can't Kill Yourself.
Nope.
They were
a brutal name.
They were.
Oh my gosh.
They were. You should look them up. They're pretty interesting. They were kind of a skate punk band that Volcom, the skate clothing company, had put together, I think, a record label at the time, and they were trying to get themselves into music. Anyway, CKY was one of those bands. We saw US Bombs play at this tiny little venue. They're on Epitaph Records. So just stuff like that. It was cool to see this kind of stuff come through town. Millions of Dead Cops used to play in Bend. They still do every once in a while.
What are all these names?
Well,
the punk scene is like, I was never too involved in punk, but like it's funny hearing, I guess. I get that it goes with like the culture of it. It's just yeah. And I think for us at the time, it just kind of, it met that need for being a little subversive, and it was something that we could go out and do on the cheap, and it was something that you could do yourself. And so flash forward, I was in Mm-hmm.
couple small bands, trying to learn how to play guitar, played a lot of cover songs, was way into Nirvana and grunge music.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the go-to at the time, was trying to learn all these Nirvana songs. They were the easiest to learn,
Right.
not to mention all the rest of this, punk stuff too. It was three chords at best, power chords and whatnot. And
Yep.
so it was easily attainable for a teenager that didn't have a whole lot of resources or friends around to start to express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of moved into eventually it. I started hanging out with a friend. His name's Sam Poole.
Okay.
If you've ever heard of Champagne Drip, not to do any name dropping, but
No,
Sam
that's fine.
Poole used to live just down the street from the house that I was living in my early 20s, and he was still a teenager at the time. And so he would come over and hang out, and he used a computer program called Reason. It's a
Right.
DAW,
Yep.
digital audio workstation, if you're familiar with that term.
Oh yeah.
Um, Not many people use Reason anymore, but at the time that was kind of the hot software. That was before Ableton really got really big.
Mm-hmm.
And the neat thing about Reason, if you've ever used it, is essentially it's an emulator. It's an emulation of rack-mounted hardware and sequencers,
Uh,
samplers, synthesizers, etc.
didn't know that.
Essentially for making whatever kind of electronic music was popular at the time. Sam was way into this tear out drum and bass that at the time was unlike anything else I had ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hanging out with him one day at his house, and he was showing off his chaos pads and his synths and all this stuff. And I was just like, what is all this stuff? It's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And he was playing some of the music that he had been working on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just total tear out drum and bass, really kind of it was rough stuff for me to hear, because I was familiar with Prodigy and stuff like that, but I had never really heard, and I knew what drum and bass was, but I'd never heard tear out drum and bass before.
Right.
And to me, there was something that was just very punk rock about it, and I was like, I want to do that. And it's cool. What's cool about electronic music is you have the option of collaborating. It's not a requirement.
For sure.
Whereas trying to start a three-piece punk band or something, you had to find two other people that you could get along with enough to actually put some songs together
Which
and find the time and the coordination and et cetera. And that can be really hard,
oh yeah,
especially as a teenager.
and
And
especially
this
in
was
the punk scene.
before,
It's like,
yeah, especially in the punk scene where a lot of people judge you, and we've all heard the term gatekeeping.
of
I mean,
course.
that's been around for a long time,
Yep.
and that was certainly a thing at the high school I went to. I got called a poser a lot by other punkers,
Jeez.
who really weren't
Yeah.
anyway. But
But who really is?
it
Let's be
was
real. We all try and put on the front of something, but it's like
yeah,
the classic. Every musician doesn't really feel like a musician. The imposter syndrome. You just have the people who try and, I guess, say that they are more of one to make themselves feel better, but
yeah. And I think people who are suffering from imposter syndrome try to make themselves feel better by making fun of other people who are also suffering from imposter syndrome.
exactly.
You know, it's and as a teenager, it's a little bit of power you can have over other kids, and so I think there was definitely some of that going on. So anyway, that was what kind of attracted me to starting to work with electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
I moved on to some shareware drum machine program I had found on the internet for free, and started making beats with it. And one of my buddies that had introduced me to grunge music and punk and all that kind of stuff, he was like, dude, this is really cool. Like, can I make some suggestions as to what you're doing? And we just kind of sat down together and started making music together. And he'd be like, hey, can you, that cymbal hit that you just did, can you make it go up and down in pitch over this sequence? Like, he didn't really know what he was doing with the software, but I kind of did.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know what I was doing production wise. It was kind of nice to have somebody sitting next to you that was just kind of generating ideas with what you should do next with the computer program. So that kind of got me addicted to it. And I started, I started hanging out with Sam Poole quite a bit at the time, and going over to his house and hanging out, and he would show me all these things. And, I got a taste for what he was doing with the tear out drum and bass. And I saw the potential of being able to make music without having to be forced into collaboration, and I love collaborating with people, don't get me wrong. That's one of the wonderful things about making music, is those aha moments you have when you're sitting down with other people,
for sure,
and creating something out of the blue.
Yeah.
But there's something to be said for being able to just do it on your own time,
Mhm.
You know, and there's definitely a steep learning curve with that kind of stuff when you're on your own, you have no background in it. But um, yeah, so that's what attracted me to it. And
Mhm.
so I kept working with it here and there. Just kind of, it was really kind of a joke more than anything at first, because it was just something to do. You
Yeah.
know, it was just something to kind of itch that scratch when I had the need to make something musical and I couldn't
Right.
coordinate with anyone else. And I also just wasn't really feeling like a musician at the time. Just wasn't something that I considered myself. I just was the person that just messed around with software and a guitar every once in a while and didn't really record much of it.
Right.
But I started to record some here and there, and I wish I still had some of those recordings that I could go back and listen to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of that is lost in time, for better or worse. And so, yeah, so a few years went by, and had another band. Tried to keep doing the punk thing with this band called Relative with a couple of friends here in town, and eventually that fell apart. And around that time that band had fallen apart, I had started hanging out with my buddy Carl Warner, who I had known since fifth grade. We've been friends for a really long time,
Mhm.
since elementary school,
Right.
and um, I hadn't really talked in probably like 10 years, and I can't remember how I got hooked up with him again. But at some point, we started hanging out again, and he would come over to my house and we would chill. And he started mentioning that he was throwing these rave parties and that they were looking for help for security, you know, and for, you know, just logistics, that kind of stuff. There's a
Sure.
lot that goes on with those parties,
Yeah,
even if you're
totally.
just having a couple hundred people, you know, setting up sound systems,
It's
moving
still a
stuff
lot.
around.
Oh
There's a
yeah.
lot that goes into it.
Mhm.
And especially back then, because this is before smartphones and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we needed to, I was like totally the guy that had like a stack of maps in a parking lot at like a movie theater or someplace. And you had to
Nice.
find me to get the map to go out to the party. That was a
Right.
renegade out in the desert, you know?
That's cool.
And so that was kind of fun because you got to meet everybody at the party, you know? And
Mhm.
so anyway, long story short, my buddy Carl was like, "Hey, we really need a security guard for this party coming up. All I need you to do is just stand in the smoking section and just make sure people aren't having fights, basically, and that nobody's dealing drugs out in the open."
Cool.
So that was kind of my job for the rave, was just to kind of sit in the smoking section, and I smoked a lot of cigarettes and I talked to a lot of high people and got to meet a lot of really interesting people from not just from the area, because, you know, granted, this is back in 2006, 2007.
Okay.
Back then, and people still do this, but back then people really went out of their way to travel to rave parties because
Right.
it was kind of a thing, was to know of it, you know, that there was a party happening 3 hours away. We would do that. We would drive to Portland and we'd go wander around out in the woods and finally find this party, you know.
Right. That's
Maybe
cool.
you knew a couple people there, maybe you didn't, but that
Mhm.
was how you made friends back then at these rave parties. And that was kind of that was one of the attractions, was driving 2 hours
Mhm.
out into the woods to find this random renegade party that was not legal, and there'd be a headliner DJ playing it. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And so I started to get more and more involved in what was happening at these parties and became more and more interested in it. And at the time, I was in a relationship that wasn't going well. And I think I kind of needed something to get me out of the house anyway.
Mhm.
And eventually it grew into, hey, we want you to come work for us. And so it was never really a paid gig per se,
Right.
although it's kind of complicated because we had other things going on as well. But um,
Okay.
yeah, it was never really quite a paid gig as much as just like a very communal, very socialist activity, if you will. We were all kind of brought together to make this thing happen. Um, for a large group of people, and we weren't necessarily going to make money off it. More often than not, the people that were throwing these shows were not making any money.
Mhm.
They were oftentimes taking a loss at it, and it was just kind of for,
Right.
I mean, let's be honest, for a lot of people it was ego. You know, it was, hey, I'm doing something really cool, you know, look at
Yeah.
me. But it was also a, hey, we're doing something really cool for the community,
Yeah.
and people really did appreciate it. And despite a lot of the negative things that come along with renegade raving, there's a lot of really cool things that come along with it as well.
Mhm.
And for me, a lot of that was just connection between the communities. You know, it'd
Yep.
be quite a bit of connection between Seattle, Portland, Eugene, Northern California, and so on.
Right.
And eventually, at some point, you kind of start booking each other for these things as you start to meet people.
Hmm.
People get bored with the same old DJs coming to the same old parties that, the same local DJs playing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so finally we'd scrap up enough gas money or money for a plane ticket for somebody to fly from somewhere else. And I can't tell you how many times I drove 3 hours all the way from Bend to Portland to pick some DJ up and drive him all the way out to the desert in
Yeah.
Central Oregon, and had a lot of really interesting long conversations
Cool.
with quite a few characters along the way.
Super cool.
Some of them who were probably a little sketched out that we were flying them into Portland and then driving them another 3 hours off into the woods.
Yeah.
But some of those people really thought it was cool too. At some point, we were booking some DJs from the UK, General MIDI, Rogue Element, Hyper, people like that, and the word kind of started to get out in that breakbeat scene in the UK that, hey, there's people doing parties in Oregon like we used to do in England. You hear about those really big renegade festival parties that rave parties that people would do in England back in the day, and 10,000 people would show up. It'd be insane. The cops would be pissed.
Hmm.
We never got to that point. I
Yeah.
think the biggest party that we ever did was maybe like 1,000 people.
That's
It was
still a
at a
big
former,
party. That's huge.
yeah, and that was crazy. It blew my mind. We did that a couple of times, and that was about as
Hmm.
big as it ever got. But those parties were intense, and people still talk about them to this day. So
Yeah.
for better or worse, that gave me the rave bug.
Hmm.
And at the time, I had started to use Sony's Acid Pro, which is a
Okay.
DAW that not many people use anymore. Its
Yeah.
specialty was certainly stitching loops together,
Cool.
which is an easy way to start producing. You just use other people's loops and manipulate them and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so I started making mix CDs, and I would throw them. At some point during an after party or something at one of these raves, be up till 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And at some point, I'd convince them. After everybody else was tired, I'd convince them to let me throw my mix CD into the CDJ.
Yeah.
And then what we had at the time, that people still use, are those fancy Pioneer DJ mixers that have got their own effects rack on them. I think it was like DJM 500 or whatever.
Yep.
So we had one of those things. And just with the effects rack on it and a mix CD, a turbo mix CD at that, I was able to throw together a DJ performance,
Cool.
and so, which is fine for 4 o'clock in the morning, but it's definitely not going to get you booked at midnight.
Yeah.
And so some of my DJ friends who are actual DJs, they would give me shit for that. They'd be like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why don't you learn how to mix on CDJs?" Or back then we still used a lot of vinyl,
Right.
which is really cool.
Hmm.
Why don't you learn how to do this? And I'd be like, dude, it's so expensive. Like between like buying CDJs or having to go to your friend's house to use them all the time, hoping that they're available. You just can't get enough practice on it unless you live with somebody that owns them.
Right.
Which I did at some point, but I just really wasn't that interested in it.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I don't like about DJing, and I'm sure other DJs would probably have something to say about this, but for me, there's just kind of a lull in between tracks that's just kind of boring, and I just kind of feel like you're just gonna like faking it for 30 seconds, until you can come up with an idea for another track. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody would have a different opinion about that, but
I,
it just wasn't really attractive to me.
I do a bit of DJing as well, so I could kind of give you some thoughts there, but I'll let you continue as well, unless you want.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely things you can do in a DJ set to keep yourself busy.
Hmm.
For example, for me, those Pioneer mixers with all the effects on them. If you get good with those effects, there's all sorts of repeats and stuff. You can make stuff pretty interesting.
Oh yeah.
Back then, we didn't have controllers,
Right.
and so you just had MIDI controllers. You didn't have all these tractor controllers and stuff like that, record box, etc. And so you were pretty limited as to what you could do on the fly.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people can really cut stuff up with controllers and do a lot of
Yeah.
on the fly sampling and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
we didn't really have that back in the day, unfortunately.
Fair enough.
Otherwise, it probably would have. I probably would have got the bug a little easier on that.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
gotcha.
people still ask me to this day. They're like, "How come you don't use CDJs?" And I'm like, honestly, there's just something frightening about them. I know how stupid easy they are to use nowadays,
Yeah.
but it's just it doesn't attract me at all.
All right.
So as part of that, it kind of came to the conclusion that I needed to, if I really wanted to do this, that I had to find a way to make it my own. And if I didn't want to mix tracks together, I was going to basically have to do a live show. And so we started messing around with equipment here and there. At first it was just like an M audio MIDI controller.
Cool.
And then eventually somebody would bring an MPC by, or one of those big Roland workstations or something, and we would all just kind of start to try to get them to work together, and it evolved into a couple of jams. And at the time, back in 2007, live PA was kind of a thing. It was not so much now. We just call it a DAW-less setup. There's no DAW, which, yeah, you
Oh,
roll your eyes,
Dallas.
me
No,
too, because
Dallas. Yeah.
it's funny people call it, like, I use an Akai Force, which is a DAW in a box, and people still convince, oh, nice analog set. I'm like, dude, it's basically just a laptop in a box. I bought it so
Yeah.
that you guys wouldn't think I was playing on a laptop.
Right.
So
My laptop
yeah, so
feeds
I mean,
into it, and yeah,
yeah,
I hear
totally.
you.
And even these record box CDJs now, I've got so much built into them that, I
Hmm.
mean, it's not a CDJ. It doesn't even take a CD anymore,
Yeah.
So anyway, oh, where was I? Yeah, so we
2007.
we started book. So we had booked a few live PA artists to come play in band. One of them was by the name of Atomic Dog. I think he passed away about 10 years ago. But he was a big influence on a lot of people on the West Coast, in California, NorCal,
Hmm.
and also in Oregon. I'm not sure where else he was playing around at, but he would do a live PA thing. What was cool about him, for those who don't know what that term is, live PA basically is like when you see photos of Aphex Twin playing on a huge desktop monitor, because he was playing directly from whatever software he was creating that music on. He wasn't rendering it onto a CD and then playing it on a CDJ. So
Right.
it's a live public address, right? And so
Right.
people have been doing that for a long time, since the 80s, and 70s,
Hmm.
when people started coming out with these drum machines and synthesizers and that kind of stuff. Kraftwerk is a really good example of a live PA electronic band that doesn't DJ, and people still think they DJ. I still get that to this day. When are you
Really?
DJing next? I don't DJ. I just press play and put loops together on drum machines. And so, well, I shouldn't say just. That's a whole different animal,
It's
right?
yeah.
And so,
There's still a talent that's necessary to do it.
yeah, I saw I think it was Carl Cox is starting to get into live PA stuff. He's moved away from doing DJ sets and is now playing strictly on drum machines, laptops, sequencers, etc. And he's
Nice.
been getting a lot of flack from people for it. And I don't think people realize how much more difficult it is to pull off a live set that hasn't been sequenced, that you're sequencing on the spot,
Yeah,
as opposed to just pressing play on a CDJ and making two or more tracks mixed together.
for sure.
Not that it's better or worse; it's just very different.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, so became addicted to watching people play live PA sets. I thought it was really cool. We also brought Zapper from Southern California. Zapper and Dat Girl, if you don't know them, they're great. They're a couple of producers, big burners. I actually saw Zapper for the first time at Burning Man. I had no idea who he was. It was just this random guy playing a live PA set to me and five other people out in the middle of the night in the desert at Burning Man.
Cool.
And then when we brought him to Bend a month later, I was like, oh shit, it's that guy. That's the random dude that I
Nice.
found out in the desert at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Nice.
And turns out that he's a friend of a friend.
That's
That's how small that world can be
seriously.
sometimes.
That's cool.
So anyway, after seeing Zapper, Atomic Dog, gosh, Woody McBride did a live set for us. He's an old school techno DJ out of Minneapolis, I want to say, Wisconsin, somewhere over there. So we had several of these guys come and do live sets, and it just kind of became a thing. Like a lot of our DJ friends kind of got into it, and it kind of became the golden standard of, yeah, you can do a DJ set, but have you seen so and so do their live set? And
Right.
that was kind of cool. I was like, maybe I should try that. And
Hmm.
so just kind of started accruing gear on Craigslist and through trades with people. And, again, I started out with just a tiny little controller and a crap version of Sony's Acid Pro, which was actually shoplifted by one of my DJ friends' girlfriends at the time, was a total klepto.
Oh no.
And she showed up one day with this and was like, I don't know what this is, but I think you guys could use it.
Oh
And I
no.
was like, yeah, DAW, I can use that. Sure, give it to me. So
Oh man.
there you go. Sometimes things fall in your lap.
For better or
So
for worse, I guess.
anyway,
Yeah.
uh, So at some point, um, I wanted to start performing this stuff, and I would say about 2008, 2009 was when I really started to put a live set together. Again, because I realized I just couldn't DJ. I mean, I could try, but it just wasn't. It wasn't as much fun to me.
Yep.
Not to knock anybody else, but it just
No,
wasn't
not at
fun
all.
for me.
Of course.
And the stress of trying to constantly change a looping sequencer is a whole different stress from trying to figure out what song you're going to play next or how you're going to mix it.
Right.
Either way, it's still the same positive anxiety
Oh yeah.
that you get in front of a group of people, and that's what I loved about it. Because the thing is, if you don't write this stuff out ahead of time, and if you're just making it on the fly, you never know what it's going to come out like. I mean, there were some sets that were absolutely epic, and there were others that
Mm-hmm.
were total crap. And so, and it still is like that to this day. We've gotten better about it,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of the magic of it.
Yeah.
So at that time, again in 2007, we had booked a DJ by the name of DJ Viro. And so he'd come all the way from Florida, the Florida break scene, I believe. He had a song that was popular at that time. So we flew him out to Oregon
Mm-hmm.
and had him play this show. I think he opened up for Rogue Element, if I remember correctly. And so, we always have after parties and that kind of stuff after
Right.
these raves, and
Yeah.
that's when you really get to know a lot of these people, especially if you're on the crew and you are at somebody's house after the rave and you're sitting around with the 4 or 5 DJs that you booked, if they're willing to hang out, because they aren't always willing to hang out, but some of them want to.
Yeah.
And so we do that. And I was
Mm-hmm.
hanging out with these DJs and became MySpace friends. It was that long ago.
Nice.
Became MySpace friends with DJ Viro. And he had put out a call to just everybody on his face or on his MySpace page that, hey, I'm starting a music distribution company and I'm looking for people to start record labels. So if you're a producer and you want to get your music published, you should start your own record label. Contact me. And I didn't have anything going on, so I thought, shit, why not? So I contacted him, and he sent me the paperwork, and that's when I started Thumbprint Recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And all of my DJ friends gave me a hell of a hard time for that, because I would play music for them that people would send me, because I would do the same thing that Viro was doing, and I'd put a thing up on MySpace and befriend all these DJs and be like, hey, do you make music? Well, come on down. We'll get you distributed. Which was a big deal back then, in my opinion, because they
Yeah.
didn't have DistroKid.
Totally.
Nowadays you can pay $20 a year or whatever it is, and it doesn't matter who you are, you can get your music on Spotify, etc. Right? As long as
Yeah.
you're willing to pay the money and have the annual subscription and meet their standards, you can get your music up there.
Yeah.
Somebody will hear it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't like that back in the day.
For sure.
You really had to have people that had the industry connections. That stuff was still highly gate kept, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew I had an opportunity to get my foot in the door on something that, even as like a placeholder, that if I wasn't going to do something with it now, that I might be able to do something really cool with it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I had my music on there, which was not good at the time. I'll admit it.
Yeah. It's
And I had my friend Johnny from California. He lives in Oakland, or in San Fran now, I think. He had come to visit. He'd actually hitchhiked to one of our raves, and with my buddy Carl, and he that's how he met us. And so he was actually playing some of his hardware in one of our after parties, and other people were making fun of him for some reason. I don't know why. Probably because he was a gutter punk that was playing electronic music at a rave party.
Right.
It just didn't fit with the Jenko crew.
Right.
And all the usual rave stuff that you saw back in the day. And so it was a little odd, and so, but I thought that was neat. And so anyway, Johnny and I became friends, and he was the first person that I approached on kind of a handshake deal with, hey, I'll distribute your music for you. And he's been with me ever since. And
Cool.
I think we've got 6 releases from him now under a variety of names.
Nice.
And then, I released my music at the time. And it kind of gave me a reason to keep releasing music. I'd get emails from Jorge Brea, who is DJ Viro, because he was still heavily involved in running that company at the time, Symphonic Distribution. I think he's stepped back a bit now because he has employees that work for him, his
Oh,
company took off.
beautiful.
So if you've never looked up Symphonic Distribution, they're one of the small competitors for stuff like DistroKid. Um, and I'm proud of what he's done. I don't know him personally, really, but I'm proud of what he's done with that company and where he's taken it today.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that my music would not be in front of the people that it was if he hadn't taken a risk to get people like me on board and to
Hmm.
start record labels that had absolutely no experience or very little material to go with.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'd get emails from them encouraging me to keep releasing material every year. There was one year I didn't, and he'd sent me an email like, "Hey, we're gonna have to drop you if you don't keep
No,
making music."
no.
And so that kind of became a big driver in continuing to release something at least every year.
Yeah.
Um, so we started doing that, and so that required starting a band and having a solo project, and then having another solo project, and then having more bands. And I think I'm now involved in 5 or 6 different projects
Wow.
because of that. It allows us to release a diverse amount of material um, over time, and to keep up with that, because it's like you've probably heard in the YouTube scene that it's important that you regularly release stuff, so that it keeps not only the attention of your listeners or your audience, but also the attention of all the algorithms and
Totally.
stuff. And so
Yeah.
that's really important in the music world as well. Unfortunately, you can't get away with just releasing something once a year. And I suspect that's why you see a lot of people releasing singles instead,
Yeah.
especially in the electronic world.
For
The
sure.
amount of time and effort and focus it takes to actually release a full album, 12 tracks or whatever, 10, whatever the minimum is, 10 tracks or
Yeah.
whatever. It takes a lot of focus and energy to do that. And so I think in
Yeah.
order to stay relevant, a lot of people are kind of switched over to singles because of
For
that.
sure. And it's also just the attention
So
span of the people nowadays. It's like if you don't release something consistently, they're just going to be like, yeah, whatever. And, back then people really cared about the artist and were invested in the individual. And now it's just like, if you're not releasing something often enough, then they don't care enough really to go online and actually find out stuff about you. So, yeah, it's a whole other world,
yeah,
that's for sure.
it's crazy to me because when I came into the music world when I was 16, we didn't have the opportunities that we have today to get your music out there. Like just being on Reddit, for example, and seeing the questions coming from teenagers. Hi, I'm 19. I'm already frustrated with my music. I don't know where to go next. There's so much competition on Spotify. I'm just like, holy shit, like that wasn't even a thought when I was
Yeah.
like a teenager in high school. Like these kids must be so overwhelmed with that. And so it um, must be extra discouraging to
Yeah.
realize that you're literally one of a billion people that's trying to get music. Not a whole billion, but there's
Still,
millions and millions and millions of people. I think something like 60,000 songs a day are uploaded to Spotify
I'm sure.
every day.
Yeah.
you
That's
know
nuts.
no, they're not all good, but who cares,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the joy of DIY in modern days is it's so much more accessible to people.
But at the same time, it's
We didn't
like, I think, sorry to interrupt, just like back
no
then
no
as well, it was like, with what you were mentioning in terms of distribution and how you would take somebody's music to the parties and that's how people would get heard. Now it's like, sure, you can upload stuff onto Spotify, but that doesn't guarantee you're getting heard. And I think there was a much, not necessarily easier, but a much more clear path towards connecting with an audience back when the internet wasn't so big. And now that, it's just the thought that I'm going to upload my song to Spotify and it's going to go big. And I think that's what most musicians and artists have come to expect without really realizing or understanding that there is a whole process to creating a musical artistic career that also involves meeting people and putting yourself out there and years and years of dedication. That doesn't, it, to some people, sure, it happens overnight, but that's one in a billion. That happens so rarely. And I think a lot of the work ethic of what it means to really commit to something and have the passion and drive for it to make sure it comes to fruition, that's been lost a lot of the time nowadays. And yeah,
People want to skip steps.
totally.
One of the things that I was told by all these DJs that we used to book back in the day when we were doing these rave parties, a lot of them were older.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of these big name, they were big name to us, or probably not to anybody else, but these people that we looked up to were in their mid 40s. And one of the things that they kept telling us is, dude, just be patient. Like you're not going to make it until you get into your 40s. I just turned 40 this year.
Hmm.
And so that kind of gives me some hope
Yeah.
that maybe before I turn 50 that we'll get a little more clout than we had.
Yeah.
I got a day job, so it doesn't matter to me, honestly.
Fair enough.
But I think there's something to that. You know, you look at Dead Mouse; he's in his 40s.
Yep.
Did anybody know who that guy was 15 years ago? Hell no, they didn't know who he was.
There's like,
And
mhm.
he's where he's at today because of his commitment and also the networking, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, and those don't come instantly.
No,
You know,
and like you look at, I think in the whole dance electronic music scene, how many of these guys actually had a big hit when they were young? I think there's like, the Martin Garrix, and then there's like there's a few more in there. But you look at where Diplo's at in his career, Skrillex, Steve Aoki, like all these guys, they've been doing the circuit for long enough that, you build up enough of a buzz that then people are excited to come to your show because they know what they can expect. But if people don't know what they can
yeah,
expect when they come to see you, they see your name and they're like, I'm interested in checking him out, but I don't know what he does. It's that consistency to the mastery of your craft that slowly but surely attracts in a larger and larger audience. And then yeah, you find your tribe, but that's it's a process, no doubt.
yeah. I heard a lot of older musicians say that you should never turn down a gig. I've
Hmm.
heard other musicians say the opposite. That it's all about how you curate,
Yeah.
and I'm not really sure what the answer is, but persistence is definitely
Yeah.
key
I
for any
mean,
of that. I think.
I think it's both. I think it's like, if you're a punk rock artist and you're getting invited to play at a country club, you're probably not going to hit it off very well with all those people. So it's maybe not worth it to do that. But if you're going somewhere where, you can kind of find a nice middle ground and there will be some people who are interested, but some people who aren't, that's generally speaking, if you're just on the bill, either opening for another band or you're just trying to do a gig, you're not trying to impress everybody there. You're just trying to find the right people who then tell their friends who also know the right people, and then that's what starts to build the name and build the crowd. It's almost insane to expect that you're going to go to any show, play it, and think that you're going to be amazing to everybody. It's like that's,
Yeah.
unless you're like a Taylor Swift the weekend type of person and you're showing up to a pop style event where people are there for pop music, you can win over an audience because they're just there to dance, sing, and have fun. But if you're more in your own rock sort of punk, electronic music, rave music, anything like that, pop doesn't necessarily get along with every crowd, but I would say it gets along with more crowds than the niche music does. So yeah,
Yeah.
just being patient.
There's a reason why it's called pop. It's
Exactly.
popular. You
Totally.
know? Yeah, and I try to remind people of that, when they're and you see so much of it on Reddit,
Hmm.
plus Reddit for what it is, but
Yeah.
there's some moments where you definitely see a lot of people who are just they are struggling with that, and um, why can't I get everybody to like me? Well, dude, you don't write pop music. You don't want everybody to like you, right? It would,
Yeah.
like I write a lot of industrial music, and it is not well received in the resort community that I live in. It's never going to be. That's the reality of it.
Hmm.
But we live in this age of the internet where I can put my music in front of the right weirdos in the
Yeah.
right places,
Yeah.
So, and I tried to describe this to my daughter the other day because she was very, she was having issues with kids at school, and getting bullied and that kind of stuff, and worried that she wasn't friends with everybody. And I told her, I was like, honey, it's like my music. I'm not trying to make everybody a fan of industrial music.
Hmm.
That kind of goes against its core.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be subversive anymore,
Yeah.
if everybody liked it. And is that unfortunate? Well, again, I have a day job, so my bills are paid, so it's okay for me personally. For me to be able to do that, that gives me the freedom
Yeah.
to express myself and
Well,
not have to alter my music to pander to the crowd.
yeah. Well, that actually it
And
relates. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say there's something to be said for pandering to the crowd, but when it starts to alter your your own creative input, and you're trying to stick to a particular genre or something, that can be a problem. So
Yeah. Well, like earlier when you were talking about punk and just being in the punk scene, it was something I wanted to ask, but just was letting your conversation or your story flow. Now with your daughter, and I think just the modern world we live in, we live so many people, everybody wants to be liked by everybody. And I think back then, correct me if I'm wrong, it's part of my question. I feel like back then the punks were more willing to go against the grain and really say what they wanted to say without caring what people really thought. So with that in mind, do you think that punk nowadays is a lot less punk than what it used to be?
Well,
I'm
you know,
curious.
we're all getting into our 40s and 50s, and I can tell you we don't party nearly as
Yeah.
hard as we
Well,
used
even like
to.
the new young
Um,
punk rockers, like the kids who have
yeah,
adopted the the essence of what it means to be punk, which is to go against the man and to really like want to
actually,
create something. Hmm.
you know, I've seen it in my daughter so far. She is a much cooler middle schooler than I was when I was that age. And one thing I've noticed about her generation, she's 11.
Hmm.
One thing I've noticed about her generation is that they are more apt to just go ahead and sew that patch on without permission. You know, I felt like you needed permission back in the day. It was almost like being in like a biker gang or something. Like,
Interesting.
where'd you get that vegan studded leather belt? Did you buy it at Hot Topic? Or
Right.
did you buy it at the record store? You know, it's like, did you have permission to even wear that? And
Interesting.
that's when you got made fun of by the gatekeepers. You know,
Yeah.
I don't see that happening as much, and I think
Hmm.
part of it, at least in Central Oregon, is that it's not as popular as it used to be. In the '90s, being a punk rocker was popular.
Right.
You know, that's the thing, and then it moved into emo and all that kind of stuff, and like that's why Hot Topic was a thing. It was because there was enough of a market to actually put it in a mall and like sell it to people. You know,
Fair enough.
so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, yeah, so I think it's actually gotten a little more DIY. I don't know. I'm not that connected to the punk scene anymore. And
Fair enough.
most of the kids that I know that are in that scene are much younger than I am. So I don't hang out with those people. But
Right.
they're making it happen, and they don't seem as apologetic or as permission seeking as we had to be in order to be accepted by the '90s punk rockers and the kids
Interesting.
in the high schools, et cetera, et cetera. So they weren't a poser, you know.
Hmm.
And then you saw a lot of the same things happening in like the skating and the snowboarding scene.
Yeah.
This kind of seemed to go hand in hand for some reason. That like, oh, you didn't have permission to be a skater at the skate park. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come back next week. So that
That.
doesn't seem to be happening as much. It seems to me that the kids that are into those scenes are um, much more DIY, and that
Mhm.
they are much more accepting of each other. And that might be a reflection of our culture is much more inclusive than it was in the '90s in
True.
general, whether you're liberal or not. So,
Yeah.
um,
The
yeah.
question that I
So
guess comes from that for me is almost, you know, definitely staying out of the politics of it. But it's like, because I think what made punk so cutting edge was almost its complete subversiveness to acceptance, where it was like, we are so anti what the world is that we are going to do everything we can to go against it. Maybe now with like how overly accepting there's like almost music in a sense, like it's not challenging the world in the same way it used to. Now it's just kind of like
it's not.
it's making products, sure, but it's not really saying what it was trying to say before. So I guess what I'm wondering is
Yeah.
like, do you think this sort of over acceptance is taking the edge out of punk and what it means to really, go against the grain and say something different? And music is a reflection of not just society, but like what we're expressing as people. And if we're not saying what needs to be said, then I think you
Yeah.
get
No,
where
I
I'm
totally
going.
agree.
Yeah.
One of the things that happened to me in the '90s was being exposed to people like Jello Biafra. You know, he was the lead singer of Dead Kennedys. He did a lot of spoken word stuff.
Hmm.
Henry Rollins, people like that, were super outspoken. And one of my favorite quotes from Jello Biafra is "Don't hate the media, become the media."
Right.
I think we've forgotten some of that, but we've also, in a lot. I mean, like people like you are the media. You know what I mean? Like that's
Heck
what's
yeah.
great
Hmm.
about about where we're at today with technology. Is it's much easier to become the media
Yeah.
than it was in 1997. You know,
Totally.
so but then also the WTO riots. Do you remember that in the '90s? You're probably too young for that,
I was
but
born in
uh,
'96. to give you some background.
Yeah, totally. So the WTO riots, that was mostly, if I remember correctly, centered around Seattle. And I don't remember a whole lot about it other than it was kind of a turning point for a lot of people who were already borderline activist punk rockers, saw what was going on there and what Jello Biafra was doing with his spoken word and others as well.
Mm-hmm.
And saying, "Hey, I can make a difference in this world," you know. So a lot of, you know, it's kind of interesting. Back in the day, you had a lot of, was it Food Not Bombs? I want to say it was an organization that existed in the '90s. It was a bunch of punkers, mostly gutter punks, that
Okay.
put together shows, and they would donate the money from the shows to Food Not Bombs, you know. And so yeah, I think there was a little bit more of that going on,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know why that is. What the difference is. I mean, that was something that we did at our rave parties too. Is we'd give you a discount on the entry fee if there was one if you
Mm-hmm.
brought in a couple cans of food, and we donate that to somebody. So stuff
Nice.
like that. You don't see people doing that stuff anymore, really.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
mean,
it's, you know, it's actually one of the gripes I have with DJ culture in general is I think that people are really afraid to play anything or say anything that's going to chase people off the dance floor.
yeah.
And that makes sense as a business owner. You know, if you're a venue owner and you're trying to keep people in the door
Mm-hmm.
to drink beer, and that's how you make your money. You don't want people leaving
Yeah.
because the DJ all of a sudden decided to go political on something.
Of course.
And so not only that, but we have this council culture nowadays too, that
Mm-hmm.
whatever is playing on stage has a reflection on the venue owner, and so the venue owner is going to be less apt to put something subversive or offensive or whatever on stage
Mm-hmm.
than they would to put a house DJ that's going to be playing all night and keep people around or whatever, you know, just use an
Totally.
example, or dubstep or
Yeah.
whatever, you know. So that's one of the problems that I have as a musician, is trying to keep people, to get people to come to shows, one, and to
Mm-hmm.
stay for the shows too, because they're used to that DJ culture. They're not used to an industrial show or
Right.
whatever that might entail. Yeah, even if it's just harsh noise and that kind of stuff, you literally see people leave the dance floor and walk out the door,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not conducive to being invited back.
Yeah.
You know, part of that is just living in a small community. Bend is less than 100,000 people. It's extremely white bread. It is not diverse,
Mm-hmm.
especially culturally.
Yeah.
You know, it's we don't we see a lot of bookings at like food cart pods and that kind of stuff, and like
Food cart pods.
smaller kind of cafe-ish venues that
Okay.
just aren't very good for loud bands. They're
Yeah.
better for a folk singer or something, you know. So
Right. Man, it's hard to build up a scene in any sort of way, and it's even harder when nobody's really coming forward with something authentic and everybody's just trying to play it safe. I think that's like that in some ways just kind of defines the world of modern music, because it's just all very safe. Everybody's trying to,
it's an echo chamber.
yeah, you look at what people are getting canceled for nowadays. Even the very concept of cancel culture, I think, is something that's, we could have a whole conversation on that as well. But
Yeah, I find it interesting, and I'm not a Bass Nectar fan, but I find it interesting that he's gotten so much flack. Yet, you know, Aerosmith and the Rolling Stones and there's all these other bands that have been around for decades that have done just as equally horrible things, if
oh yeah,
not worse.
yeah,
And we all know about it.
yeah.
And I'm not trying to defend Bass Nectar at all, but um,
I mean, I
you
don't know
know,
what happened, but
thrift works, things like that. There's a lot of situations that have happened, and it's great. I think it's good. Generally, it's a good progressive move that we're holding artists accountable for these things. It's absolutely wonderful.
yeah.
But it is kind of interesting that we have this double standard. You know, just because somebody's been around for longer and they're more popular,
Mm-hmm.
it's pop music, and so it's untouchable for some reason. So, but yeah, I think that's a big thing. I think that at least I'm feeling in the small community that I live in,
For
is
sure.
that we're not Portland, we're not Seattle, we're not Eugene, and we don't have enough weirdos in this resort community to support a weird music scene,
Right.
which is fine. You know,
Yeah.
it's we are in modern times. It's easy enough to garner support from other cities. You know, I personally think that my band, so one of my bands, Thumbprint Collective, would probably do a lot
Mm-hmm.
better in a place like Eugene or Seattle or Portland,
Mm-hmm.
where there are, just statistically speaking, more weirdos. And
Yeah.
so,
It's also just more
they're going to,
people, I think. Right.
yeah, there's just more people around. So of course you're going to have more
Yeah.
diversity in what those people want to hear. So
Hmm.
yeah, so that's part of it, is just kind of getting out, and that's one of the bad parts about having a day job that supports that does pay my bills. Unfortunately, music does not, and so that's the priority, is to go to work
Hmm.
Monday through Friday or whatever, and make sure I can make my Sweetwater payment.
Yeah, you gotta
So,
do keep that subscription active.
yeah, yeah,
Is that's it? That Sweetwater's the guitar or audio site? Am I right?
yeah. They're like
Yeah.
they're like a musician's friend or
Yeah.
whatever,
Cool.
So they make it really easy, for people with a little bit of credit, and
Hmm.
don't balk at any 0% interest in payments to fill up your studio full of crap real fast.
That's sweet.
So
I need to check. Yeah, I should check it out. I need to. I don't know. I had a bad habit of just buying plugins and everything else, and now I'm trying to work with what I've got and use the tools that I have to build something and focus on that. I spent a lot of time thinking I needed more of this and more of that before I could finally do what I wanted to do, and now I'm realizing that I got everything I need, and the internet has so many opportunities available that it's just about what I'm making of them for myself. So yeah, let's fast forward a little to Chris today. What's happening in the world of 2023, Chris, and Thumbprint Records and everything going on there, or Thumbprint
well,
Collective? Sorry.
after COVID, or during COVID, I should say, there wasn't a whole lot to do,
Hmm.
and so that kind of became a driver for me to spend more time on the record label, and as much as I could. I mean, we don't make any money. I don't want. We're not a not profit. We're a not making money business, and that's fine. That's the way it's set up.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I mean, if you don't count all the equipment that I've purchased, we're actually $300 in the green. So
All
for
right.
15 years of,
Yeah.
of record sales. Um, it's what's interesting is that you do. I keep my eye on the statistics and the data. Looking at the data for the record label between Spotify and through symphonic distribution, you can get two different pictures.
Hmm.
By the way, if you have music out there and you're not using your artist account for Spotify, highly recommend it, because it will give you insights into your crowd and the kind of music that they like. And if you're the type of person to modify what you're doing to try to get more of that type of crowd, it gives you useful data to work with.
It's
So
true.
anyway, I've just kind of been looking at the numbers over the last few years, and have noticed that we've been getting a little more attention in other countries. Um, and been trying to pay attention as to what kinds of music has been more popular with people than others.
Hmm.
And I'm always surprised at
Hmm.
which songs we hate or I hate that ends
Of
up number one on
course.
Spotify for some reason. We don't make a lot of money. It's
Hmm.
thousands of pennies per play or whatever. So,
Yeah.
but I will say that we made the most money we have in the last year. It floated around about $100 for the last 10, 12 years or so.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, in the last year or so, we've been getting a lot more plays, and now they owe me $300.
There you go.
you know,
Congrats.
that's, and that's not just me, that's also the other people on the label,
Hmm.
that all need to be paid out. But
Of course.
yeah, so it's not money that we need. So I've just kind of been sitting on it, letting the distribution company sit on it, because there's no reason to get it right now. I don't
Hmm.
want to pay taxes on something that I don't need to yet.
Fair enough.
So things have been going all right. We've been getting a little more attention. We've been trying to play out some shows. That has been difficult in the area that I'm at, for reasons I mentioned before. It's just kind of a weird scene here, and I think COVID did something to the music scene here in Central Oregon. I don't know if that's
Everywhere.
occurring everywhere,
Oh yeah.
but there's some kind of weird. I don't know what's going to fix it, but it just really. I mean, speaking for Central Oregon,
Hmm.
there's a lot of sobriety issues in Central Oregon. Weed is legal here, drugs are easy to get, and alcohol is encouraged because of all the breweries, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a bit of a party scene here for years, long time. It's
Yeah.
been happening probably since the 30s in Bend. There's been a little bar scene.
Hmm.
And with COVID, I think a lot of people sobered up. They quit doing drugs, or they stopped drinking as much alcohol, or they just quit going out because they found other things to do with their lives,
Hmm.
self included. And so I think that has been a big driver in that there's just not as much of a scene to go out and party anymore. And I don't know if that's happening in other places. And, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
great when people stop doing drugs and drinking as much, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
But it's definitely affecting the scenes. And just to give you an example, the last show that I played at the usual venue that I go to, we had three people there, and
Wow. Okay.
two of them were the bartender and the sound guy. So,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, that is very discouraging when you got one person come out and, so that
Yeah.
person got a special set and then we went home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's really discouraging.
Yeah.
So
Seriously.
part of that for me has been kind of trying to change how we put ourselves in front of people, and I had an epiphany in the last few weeks after that show that trying to invite people to come to us is not working. We need to be put in front of people, and to me, that's a captive audience versus a non-captive audience. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's easy enough for us to get bookings at festivals and that kind of stuff. And the people at the festival don't really have a choice as to whether or not they're going to hear you. They can move further away from the stage,
Yeah.
but they're still going to stay to see the next band, right? And
Yeah.
um, so there's something to that, and I think that's probably a strategy that we're going to try this next year is doing a lot more captive audience
Mm-hmm.
types of bookings,
Yeah.
where it's not just me trying to promote our own show that nobody goes to because it's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
effort and sometimes a little bit of money that you lose out of your pocket just trying to get people to come to a show at a bar.
Yeah. I think it's also like,
For
or
Go ahead.
yeah, it's like going back to sort of my reference of punk rock and that type of stuff and how it was, it was people coming together for a purpose of something. There's a central theme that everybody's connecting on, which is what the music is expressing and what the audience is expressing back to the artists through the music. And I think that's what creates the captivity in a moment versus like, if a band's just on stage and all they're doing is they're there to sell their record, then the audience either cares or they don't. Whereas,
Yeah.
when there's a cause behind it or a reason behind why people are connecting in the same way of kind of how I've sort of been learning to position this podcast for myself is that when there's a purpose behind, bringing people together for the sake of creating harmony and understanding one another's stories and recognizing that musicians have so much more in common than we do have differences. It's like there's a reason and intent behind that, and then people connect to that purpose and find their own purpose within that, which is why they want to contribute towards it. So it's
Yeah.
almost kind of finding what the going back to like what the reason is to why you're making music and why you're sharing that music, and then that's what creates that real sort of connection between artist and audience. That's
Yeah, another epiphany I've had recently is that trying to life is only so short.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's we're only going to be on this planet for so long. You got to work a 40-hour week job, et cetera, et cetera. I got two kids. I've got a girlfriend. I've got all sorts of stuff going on in my life, and there's just limited time to do all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting to realize that these shows that I put that if I put together a show, it takes a couple of weeks of practice. And like this last show, I was going to do a workshop. The first hour was going to be a music production workshop,
Mm-hmm.
and so that nobody came to. And so that's a lot of prep. I thank God I didn't put a bunch of time into a PowerPoint and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I knew I used to teach classes on Ableton, so I knew what I
Cool.
wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
and I had a pretty basic skeleton for what I wanted to do. And so it wasn't that big of a waste of time, but it could have been a huge waste of time to put that much effort into something that nobody's going to come out to or appreciate,
For
or
sure.
no, I shouldn't say nobody, one person did,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. That's great that one person did. And they were positively affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
But it starts to make you think that maybe that's not the best use of time, And so I used to kind of dread spending time in the studio, especially with other people, because um, it can be tense, just trying to get an idea down musically that everybody agrees on. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a little easier when you're by yourself, but it's still tense,
Mm-hmm.
putting yourself out there for people.
For sure.
And I used to not look forward to that, and now I realize that what I really don't look forward to is putting that much energy into a show that nobody wants to go to.
Interesting.
And at least the time that I spend putting into recording, it's to me, it's similar to the time that a painter puts into actually creating a real piece of art.
For sure.
It's there forever.
Yeah.
It's not there forever. Nothing's
Yeah.
real. It's all good. But like, it's there long enough. It's there longer than the one person was to see me play at my show. And so,
Hmm.
it's not going to discourage me from wanting to do shows in the future, but it's definitely going to help me to see the value in the time that we spend in the studio,
Yeah.
actually recording music and publishing it and putting it out there. And, if it's around as long as the human race is, that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
People aren't going to remember that show. They didn't go to it, but they can
That's true.
access that album at any time, whether they've downloaded it or stream it or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Which is like
so
actually,
that's been part of it too, is just kind of trying to renegotiate with myself what my priorities are. Because I
mhm.
used to love playing shows so much, but shows are only fun to play when people come to them.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it's a double-edged sword for sure. Uh,
Yeah.
no, best of luck with it, man. I hope you're able to find your crowd out there, and that there's a cause out there for sure that even finding a way to connect with the working class dads who have kids who just want a chance to get out there and play some music and have a good time. I think there's a lot more out there than you'd think, and yeah, just knowing how to
Yeah.
resonate with the right people and find your audience. It's a fun process of kind of going within yourself and recognizing, what is it that I wish I had, and how do I turn that into the words to be able to attract in the right people who also want the same things that I do. And
Well,
yeah.
you got to ask yourself if it even matters sometimes. It's
Mhm.
for me again, it was a lot of reprioritization of what I really wanted to get out of this. And for me, 10, 15 years ago, it was playing music live in front of people.
Mhm.
Priorities change. That's okay. We evolve as human beings, as
Yeah.
artists, and as individuals. And I think that's just part of becoming older, is accepting that, and that it's okay that your priorities can change too. So, and
Yeah.
who knows? I'm only 40 years old. I might make it big all of a sudden and have way too much on my plate. Have to try to figure that out. But
Yeah,
for me, that's at this time, it's probably time better spent in the studio making things that people can listen to whenever they want,
for
as
sure.
opposed to having to come see me to listen to it.
Yeah.
And that's another form of captive audience, is when you get on streaming and you make it into the algorithm, and all of a sudden Spotify is representing you and putting your music out there in front of people who've never heard it before. And even if you do only make a 1,000th of a cent off it, that's still magic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's so many ways to find the right people nowadays, and I think the internet is like almost overwhelming at times with how much opportunity it presents us, but really I guess uh learning how we use it, and how we can elevate our own creation and platform from who we are into that. It's a really fun process, which it's, and as you're saying, you could blow up overnight all of a sudden. I think too many people see success as something that if it doesn't come to you young, then you're a failure. But
yeah,
we're all
that's a
on
horrible
this.
attitude to have.
Yeah, brutal. It's like we're all on
Yeah.
this really unique, individualized journey, and I had that attitude for a long time. When I was 18, 19, I was seeing kids around my age who were finding success in their own ways, and it's just like, oh man, like I'm just a failure. I'm not doing anything with my life, and it's just that attitude is what prevents so many people from recognizing, I mean, a lot of things, but one thing is that success comes to you when you're ready for it as well. It's really a process of getting to know ourselves, opening up to our own creativity and creation, and yeah, opening ourselves up to the world as well. So it's a
Yeah,
cool
it's sad
process.
to see musicians give up so early in their lives. And I think that's one of the depressing things about being on Reddit, is seeing so many people that are about ready to give up on something that obviously means a lot to them.
Yeah.
And it's over something as petty as, there's not enough people that like me. I'm not getting enough comments on
Hmm.
my SoundCloud. Well, who cares? All I get is bots on my
Me too,
SoundCloud.
man. That's the other downside of the internet. It's all just, I don't know. Don't pay for streams. Don't do
Don't
any of
pay for
that.
streams.
Yeah.
Don't pay advertisers. That's the other thing that gets me. It's like, oh, I'm not popular enough. Yeah, you could give Facebook $300 of your hard-earned money
Crap.
for them to put you in front of the absolutely wrong people,
Mm-hmm.
and you've wasted your $300 you could have spent on a new instrument or paying off some debt or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel really bad for those people, but it's because I've been there. I totally get it. I considered
Yeah.
giving Facebook $300 so I could get more people at my show. I'm not sure that it would have benefited me at all
Yeah.
to
Dude,
get two more people at my show.
I paid like
So
$500 or something to get my song, Spotify plays, and I was like, cool, these are all definitely organic. And then I didn't get paid a cent for the streams, recognizing they were all just bots, and it
yep,
did nothing. It was the biggest waste of money. But I learned my lesson, and hopefully I can, in the same boat, help others prevent others from potentially making that mistake too. So, yeah, take
yep,
that money and put it elsewhere. Uh,
yep. I totally agree.
Chris, man, thank you so much for having a conversation with me. Super interesting path. Any like last words you want to share as well to people and musicians out there?
Yeah, I've been doing myself a huge disfavor if I didn't plug my website,
Please do.
thumbprintrecordings.com.
It's
We
going to
got
be in
lots of free
the
music,
description as well.
tons. Yeah, nice. Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate that. And
of
yeah,
course.
I think honestly that last point that we made about being careful about how you spend your money out in the music industry, money is energy. That's a fact. And yeah, don't give your money to people that aren't gonna represent you well.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of scams out there. And
so
yeah,
many.
learn from others' mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Learn from our mistakes. It's
Yeah,
and you said, sorry, I was talking over you, thumbprintrecordings.com.
correct.
Cool. All right, that's going to be in the description. Chris, thank you so much, man. All the best out in Oregon. I guess you're
Thank
pretty
you.
much like just down below me. I'm up in Vancouver, so maybe we'll meet in the
Nice.
middle sometime. But yeah,
Cool.
dude, all the best. Have a good day, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you, Aiden. Have a good day.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. We are the media. I like that. Chris, man, yeah, thank you so much. Another fantastic conversation. Just super cool to hear another person's story and the way in which music and life progresses. So many people, I think the big part for me, we try and find success overnight, but success is this journey, it's this process, and just learning to be happy with where we're at, learning to embrace the process. That is the exciting part, because if you hit that success but you're not happy with where you are anyways, you're going to get there and it's just never going to be enough. Learning to find that peace, find that balance, find that center. It's a huge part of the musician's journey. I'm super grateful to have everyone that is tuning in alongside me on that journey. My name's Aiden. This is Studio Raphael. Thank you so much for tuning in. Check out Chris's stuff. Let's support the community. It's the best way to do it. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you around the studio sometime. Take care.